In the fall of 1974, America was terrified. A ghost was moving through the South. He was charming, handsome, and utterly ruthless. He was a killer who went by many names. The police knew him as a suspect in a string of brutal murders. The press would soon call him the Casanova Killer. But to Barbara Mabee Abel, he was just the man standing in her kitchen with a shotgun. This is the true story of how a single mother used her wits, her charm, and a desperate gamble to outsmart a psychopath and survive. West Palm Beach, Florida. November 14, 1974. It was a Thursday. Barbara Mabee Abel was a 31-year-old single mother, working as a copywriter for a local radio station to support her two dependents, her 6-year-old son, Dale, and her twin sister, Beverly. Beverly lived with Barbara. She had been born with cerebral palsy, and Barbara was her primary caretaker. It was a life of routine, work, picking up Dale from school, and coming home to Beverly. But that day, the routine broke. Barbara tried calling Beverly all day. No answer. She felt an eerie chill, a sense that something was deeply wrong. When she and Dale pulled into the driveway that afternoon, she saw the back porch lights were on. They were never on during the day. She called out for Beverly as they entered the house. Silence. Dale ran to his room. Barbara walked toward the kitchen to get a glass of water. Then, she heard his voice. "Don't turn around, or I'll shoot." Like an idiot, as she would later describe it, she turned around. In front of her stood a man with gaunt good looks and cold eyes, holding a sawed-off shotgun. It was Paul John Knowles, the Casanova Killer. But she didn't know that yet. All she saw was a stranger in her home. Then, her son, Dale, came running back into the room. He was terrified. Barbara rushed to the bedroom. The sight was horrifying. Her twin sister, Beverly, was naked, bound, and gagged. Blood dripped from her mouth. Knowles had already tried to rape her, and he boasted about it. The killer just laughed. He was a predator who had already murdered at least a dozen people, though he claimed as many as 35. He was desperate, fleeing, and he needed a hostage. His eyes turned to the only other person in the room, the little boy. Knowles announced his plan. He was leaving, and he was taking Dale with him. It was every mother's worst nightmare come to life. Barbara knew in that moment that she couldn't let him take her son. He would kill him. She knew she had to act. She had to think faster than she had ever thought before. She offered herself as the sacrificial lamb. She promised to go with him willingly, to do whatever he wanted, as long as he didn't hurt her family. Knowles agreed. He took Barbara, the family's beige Volkswagen, and the mortgage money. As they drove away, she looked back at the house, promising her sister silently that she would survive. She had to. As they drove toward Georgia, Barbara knew she was in a fight for her life. The odds were stacked against her. She was a woman alone in a car with a violent killer. He had a gun. He was stronger than her. But she had a weapon he didn't expect, her mind. She knew that physical resistance would be futile. So, she employed a strategy of psychological manipulation, a survival technique rooted in pure terror. She had to make him fall in love with her. She decided to become the best actress in the world. She turned her fear into a performance. I told him how I thought he looked like Robert Redford. I was trying to build up his confidence. She knew he was a narcissist. He craved admiration. She began to feed his ego, telling him he was smart, that he was powerful. She asked him about his family, listening attentively. She played the role of the infatuated partner, the one person who truly understood him. Exhausted from the drive, Knowles stopped at a motel in Fort Pierce, Florida. As they walked to the front desk, Barbara made a strategic move. She wrapped her arm around him. She pretended they were a loving couple on a trip. Knowles had the shotgun hidden under his coat, and she knew he would kill the desk clerk at the first sign of trouble. Her act protected the innocent woman behind the counter. But once they were behind the closed door of the motel room, the Dr. Jekyll persona vanished. The Mr. Hyde emerged. He raped her. He tied her to the bedposts using bedsheets. He gagged her. She was helpless, trapped in a dingy motel room with a monster. It was then that fate intervened. Knowles turned on the television. His face and Barbara's face appeared on the news. The story was breaking: Barbara was missing. The police had found Beverly and Dale. Dale, the brave 6-year-old, had managed to free himself and run to a neighbor's house, who then called 911. Knowles wasn't scared. He was excited. He was thrilled to see himself on TV. And Barbara, a radio copywriter by profession, saw her opportunity. She told him she was a writer. She offered to help him tell his story. She promised him immortality in print. She dangled the one thing he couldn't resist: notoriety. She made herself not just a hostage, but his biographer. In his twisted mind, she became valuable. The next morning, he took her to breakfast. While he ate a hearty meal of eggs and hash browns, she looked around the crowded diner. She prayed someone would recognize her. But she remained silent. She knew the gun was under his coat, and she knew he would shoot anyone who tried to stop them. Back in the motel room, the cycle of violence repeated. He raped her again. Later that evening, he left her tied up to go make a phone call. He was arrogant. He was in a rush. He wanted to check in on the manhunt. But he made a fatal mistake. He left the motel room key inside the room. When he returned, he was locked out. Knowles's voice came through the door. He was panicked, but he still had to maintain control. He told Barbara, who was gagged, that he couldn't get in. He said he was leaving. The last thing he said to her was, "I love you." Then, the sound of his footsteps faded away. He was gone. Barbara was alone. Tied to a bed, gagged, and bleeding. She knew he might come back. She knew she had minutes, maybe seconds, to act. She was still bound at the wrists and ankles by knotted bedsheets. She frantically looked around the room. She saw the key on the nightstand, just out of reach. She couldn't move the furniture. But she could move her body. She dragged herself toward the nightstand. She noticed the glass tabletop on the nightstand was broken. A sharp edge protruded. Desperately, she began to saw through the bedsheets. The glass cut her skin, but she didn't care. One by one, the bonds snapped. Her hands were free. Then her feet. She dragged herself to the phone on the nightstand. Her hands trembling, she called the motel manager. And said, "I was kidnapped by a serial killer." Law enforcement rushed to the motel. Barbara was safe, but the manhunt for Knowles was far from over. Barbara was finally able to speak with her son, Dale. He had been a hero, freeing himself and saving his aunt. He was filled with joy to hear his mother's voice. Paul John Knowles, the Casanova killer, didn't go far. On the run again, he killed 2 more men, a state trooper and a businessman, before being arrested days later. He didn't survive his capture for long. In December 1974, he managed to pick a handcuff lock and tried to grab an agent's gun. He was shot and killed by another officer. The nightmare was over, but the scars remained. Barbara suffered from PTSD. She eventually wrote a book about her experience, called One Survivor, to finally take control of the narrative and to keep a promise to her twin sister, Beverly, who passed away in 2019. She also found a soulmate, Jim Abel, and married him, living a happy, full life. Barbara Mabee Abel faced the worst monster imaginable. He was charming, ruthless, and a killer. But she fought back with the only weapon she had, her mind. She convinced him she was his ally, his admirer, and his ticket to fame. She seduced him with words. And in doing so, she bought herself enough time to escape. Her story is a testament to the incredible power of human intuition and the fierce will to live. She didn't just survive. She outsmarted him.